Okay, this is for Sun and Leo in the 11th house. I'm going to start this video by sharing a little bit about some of the research that I've been doing to try and better understand how each constellation acquired its attributes and its qualities. And I did this by starting to look at, every astrological age and use that as a reference to go in and find out what was happening during those times to better understand the constellation itself. And I found this very helpful. I haven't done it for all of them, but I started putting together this chart, and I just entered some information for the age of, the different ages of Leo that I found. And going back really provided, looking at it this way, really provided a lot of confirmation on why we have attributed certain qualities to the age of Leo, or to Leo as a constellation itself. So the last age of Leo was between 10,900 approximately and 8,700 BCE. During that time was the was the end of the Ice Age, and so we can see that obviously the sun is associated with Leo, and during certain ages where Leo was playing the predominant role in terms of its being the constellation that was ruling during that time, we had sun worship, and there was a lot of information coming in about our relationship to the sun, how the galactic sun is basically activating different parts of our DNA. So just coming back to where we are here, the last age of Leo, we can see the end of the Ice Age, when individuality started appearing, and with it the urge to lead and organize primitive social structures. So, Leo, as many of you know, has a quality of leadership to it, individuality, being extremely loyal. It also, is quite private. It can be very rambunctious or shy. It has the qualities of creativity. It's associated very strongly to joy, and not often mentioned, but it is very strongly associated to intuition. And so we can see kind of how this plays out here within the last age of Leo, basically coming out of these primitive lifestyles, the impulse to individualize ourselves created social structures. So the more that we got to know ourselves, the more complex things became, and also the more self-reflective we were, the more aware we were, and the more conscious we were of our surroundings, our interactions, and then came that impulse to better organize ourselves, because we knew ourselves better, and we started to understand ourselves better, and what we needed to stay alive for longer periods, regarding longevity, and how we can use better methods for doing certain things regarding food, agriculture, which came in right after the end of this Ice Age. So this was coming out of that very primitive animalistic urge, and moving into a more refined state of being, where we were connecting with something larger than ourselves. We were connecting with something, this impulse to connect with our divinity, and perhaps that impulse of individualization led us to ponder, the bigger questions of life, where we're from, become more existential, And so that was sort of creating this bridge between the animalistic and the divine. And, going back further, the one preceding that, we can see, modern humans created paintings, art, and musical instruments. So we began to have that creative impulse. You could just picture Leo here kind of saying, you know what, guys, we've been doing a lot of work. Let's go have fun. Let's go create. And like at that time, it was almost, it was a very rebellious act to go and do something that seemed so kind of maybe useless and abstract for people, within the culture at the time, where survival instinct was really big, and to kind of have that leisurely time to just sort of lounge around and want to create or want to think and evolve on that level must have created a lot of inner conflict, right? As human beings pushed through that period, there was probably a lot of conflicting feelings within as they moved into, this new age of Leo, where creativity was given a proper place with, all of these other instincts of survival and mundane chores and activities. The age before that, the age of Leo before that, around 62,500 BCE, was when, modern humans, like anatomically modern humans, created worldwide migration and drawings. So as we began to draw and then leave that permanent marking on the wall, they were kind of like, we're creating signposts, right, for other cultures when they would go into that cave, or different people moving around would be able to kind of speak to each other globally. And so all of this is sort of tying into Leo in the 11th house in particular, which is interesting. And then the age before that, age of Leo, modern humans began crafting tools themselves, which we eventually use to create more refined art with. And then going even further back, the age of Leo preceding that was around 114,204 to 112,044. We find the oldest evidence of modern bees. And I thought that was really interesting because bees are, they take pollen from one flower and they bring it to another flower, and they basically end up, it's like they're cross-pollinating culture from these different families and species of flowers, and they're creating this interconnected web of life that is similar to like the ley lines that we can see in the 11th house. Is a communication highway within the mineral grids in the earth, and also other elements, water, the waterways, and the 11th house, it represents groups. It represents these larger organizations, and that's why we see, from the micro to the macro, we can always make that connection. And within societies, these groups are located all around the world, and they have an interconnectivity based on their theme and based on, what their purpose is. They are kind of cross-pollinating information with other institutions, but also within their own. And that is also can be seen as a sort of a grid of consciousness, or a grid of information, a grid of communication, just like the ley lines. And so the flowers, are also, that's a whole interconnected web throughout, this different species of plants. And so you have these bees, or the oldest evidence of modern bees found during that age of Leo, and how this connects into just this idea of where the impulse or the urge, right, to cross-pollinate, to this urge that nature produced to bring to bring pollen from one plant to another, to connect through cellular memory, to connect through energetic osmosis, all of the different flowers all around the world, right, and the plants, and how that impulse to bring about interconnectivity with the flora and fauna is an impulse of Leo, and especially Leo in the 11th house. So I find it interesting that this connects to Leo in the 11th house, because this is age of Leo, and we can speak of every single house, but we're speaking of Leo in the 11th house. And so going back, we can continue to look at how there was a connection to the qualities that we give to the constellation of Leo, and the events that occurred during that astrological age. And we can do this for all of the signs. And so that gives us a really, really good, I think, confirmation on why each astrological sign, each constellation, has the qualities that it does. And as within as without, this is just a map to understand those principles at a deeper level. And so looking a little bit deeper into this, we're looking at Leo, who's independent. Leo who's kind of has this, this impulse to individuate, to stand out, to be its own individual, through honing its own creativity, because it has that creative expression naturally that's beaming in through the galactic sun, and really bringing out those qualities within people who have Leo as their sun sign, which represents the personality, are honing in on this creative impulse through that influence, and are cultivating that within themselves as a main kind of quality and theme to that sign. And so taking Leo and putting it in the 11th house is sort of doing the same that these bees were doing, right? So Leo is, bringing that creativity to a vast array of like a kind of big picture on things, like, instead of just the individual institution, it's looking at how the institutions are connected. Instead of just one geographical area, it's connecting all these geographical areas through the ley lines. Instead of just looking at one individual, it's looking at the collective. And so it's interacting on that level with the 11th house, and it is experiencing itself through that container. And so I think the impulse here is for Leo to cross-pollinate between many different groups, many different cultures, to understand the bigger picture as much as possible within life experience, like to go to as many places as possible. The 11th house is important travel, but it would have that, the curiosity, the creative curiosity for Leo to explore, and express that 11th house energy is to understand more than just one. Like the 8th house would be the underbelly of the institutions. The 9th house is the individual institution, that specific religious institution or philosophical understanding. Whereas the 11th house is like many, it's plural. And so here it is really comparing a lot and learning a lot from a lot of comparison, a lot of different cultures, a lot of different groups, and a lot of different institutions, seeing their interconnectivity and also feeling that interconnectivity. Leo has a big heart, and so a lot of the energy that Leo emits regarding creativity and joy is coming from tapping into that inner child and being playful. And being playful is exactly what allows Leo to expand out of that singular into the plural. Because in order to expand and see something more than ourselves, to see for that individual Leo to see more than itself, it has to expand its heart to include many. It's sort of an uncomfortable house for Leo to be in, because Leo tends to want to move towards a place where it is comfortable to create, or a place where it's comfortable to be in leadership, to have that confidence. And yet here in the 11th house, it's being expressed as, having to find that stepping and find that footing with many organizations. And the humanitarian in the 11th house really goes and pulls at Leo's heartstrings, so we can talk about, different global events happening. So Leo in this position, if Leo is connected to the collective consciousness, it's, Leo's really going to feel, it's not just going to be, mentally understanding it or feeling it kind of viscerally. It's really going to be feeling it in the heart and feeling the sorrow, feeling the joy, feeling all these global events on a heart level. And so I think Leo in this position is also the rebel, because it is still separate. It's not part of any one particular group. Because if you have Leo, for example, in the 9th house, that individual would more than likely shine within one institution, kind of work their way up to the top of, it could be a business, it could be religious institution. Whereas being in the 11th house, it's kind of having to shine in many. And so I think the cross-pollination and the creativity becomes more important for Leo in the 11th house, because it's having to kind of combine many different pollens, cross-pollinate many different ideas to obtain or maintain the inner child, and also obtain that kind of heart healing energy that it really, Leo always attempts to share with the world. And so, the downside of Leo being in the 11th house is it is going to be the rebel, right? So the individual versus the group, because it will be that personality that moves around from group to group, which will always be seen as the heretic in some sense, right? It's not, if you're doing it, if you're moving around a lot within one specific territory or one specific group, you kind of, there's no insider, outsider. There are no themes of being the outsider to have to traverse. So just as if you have on the opposite end, it's always good to look at the opposite ends. If you flip it around and you have Aquarius, the 11th house, so represented by Aquarius in the 5th house, you're going to have the group versus the individual. And on this end, it's the individual versus the group. So it's, again, attempting to bridge something larger than what is already present. And in the last age of Leo, this is exactly what was occurring. And in order to bring about a synthesis, a greater synthesis of the elements that are present, it takes combining, you're combining a lot of different elements. So combining a lot of different ideas, finding the similarities between different institutions, different organizations, and then bringing that into the heart center, allowing that alchemy to happen, to then birth something that is able to provide commonality between all of these different groups and organizations, and also an understanding of their interconnectivity. So if we're working with the ley lines, for example, we can understand the interconnectivity of the world, and by doing something at one geographical location, we know that it's going to affect something else happening at another geographical location due to the interconnectivity of the ley lines. And so if we interact a certain way with one institution, we know that it's going to have a ripple effect within that grid of consciousness of those institutions, right? And so on every single level, even with humanitarian, with our humanitarian hopes and dreams, I think a lot of this is birthed out of, idealism, because the 11th house is our hopes and dreams, and it's everything to do with idealism and, in a sense, perfection, and wanting to do the impossible. Like, there's a lot of utopian energy in the 11th house that Leo has to contend with, and understand that those ideals aren't always realistic, because we're dealing with individuals that are continuing to individuate on the planet. We're in that age where we are, coming into embodiment and coming into soul activation, coming into that individuality. And so there's kind of a tension that Leo has to hold here regarding where the group wants to go versus where the individual wants to go, and doing its best to bring together those threads where possible, to connect where it makes sense and it's practical and it's durable, it's going to last, and then to understand where it's just, Leo's being idealistic and it's not possible to necessarily bring those two ingredients together. And so Leo in the 5th house is going to be the rebel, within the group. Leo is the rebel with a cause, in the sense that Leo is always connected to the heart. So there's always this bigger kind of mission that, Leo has a lot of faith. It's connected to those codes coming in through the sun. So it's very strongly believes that the sun is shining upon us all, and we are all, in a sense, moving forward and evolving and connecting with that soul spark that is going to activate us. And in a sense, that happening is a way of how we are all connected around the globe. So even if it's happening differently for different individuals at different times, different institutions are changing at different times, and we're having to deal with the different energies moving all the way from the ley lines to these higher grids of consciousness within the astral. There's still a connection between it all, and that is that we are all evolving through the warmth of the sun. And so I think how I'll end it for Sun in Leo in the 11th house is to just bring forth the words of encouragement, for Leos in this particular placement, to continue tapping into the inner child, to continue holding space for that creativity to emerge, making time for pleasure, for joy, and understanding that in order to be like the bee that is cross-pollinating and keeping everything alive, in essence, by doing this work of, bringing little bits of information from one place to the next, from one organization to the next, from one group to the next, in order for every group to have enough to receive little influences to spark creativity. Because if everything's mundane and everything's the same and there's nothing pushing up against anyone or anything, there's no evolution whatsoever. And so every group, every institution needs to have an external influence, right? To be aware of what's going on outside of themselves, and also to have that stimuli in order to continue producing and creating. And so being okay with being the individual versus the group, being okay with having creativity at the forefront, and bringing that creativity to many different places. That creativity isn't just going to be, shared, for example, like in the 3rd house, more locally with friends and family, siblings, local community, nor is it going to be simply, creativity for creativity and becoming perhaps like in the 5th house, really honing in on what it is to be an artist. It's bringing that creativity not into the 7th house, where it's, sharing that pleasure and joy and relationships, and nor in the 9th house, where, it's bringing that creativity into one religious institution or, one university or one group. It's really bringing it into the 11th house and bringing it to many, and bringing it to the act of interconnectivity itself, the act of creatively connecting, right? Could be creatively networking or creatively interacting with many groups, or creatively bringing many groups together. So yeah, I think that's what I'm going to bring forth on Sun in Leo in the 11th house. If you'd like to reach me for a session, you can do so at inspiringplayfulevolutions.com. You can email me at 21stcenturyweaver@gmail.com. I really like juxtaposing all the different systems, Gene Keys, human design, the Western chart, and the Mayan, and really get a big picture, which is very much Leo in the 11th house. All right, take care.